Given the tragedies in the last 6 weeks, concerns about safety and what on earth you tell your kids about all of this has become ever present in a way it's never been before. We're going to talk about that and about what you can do to prevent bad situations from becoming worse on Crisis Prevention and Intervention next on Speak Your Mind. Welcome to Speak Your Mind. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps, licensed psychologist with the Human Development Center. Crisis Prevention and Intervention was developed to train professionals how to respond in an effective way to de-escalate potentially dangerous situations. Its emphasis is on nonviolent crisis intervention and has a core philosophy of providing for the care and welfare and safety and security of everyone involved in the crisis situation. Although the training has historically been targeted for groups of professionals, the specific skills are valuable for all of us to know and can be applied human to human. And in the wake of the shootings which have occurred in the last 7 weeks, we also will be addressing, because I know many of you who have kids and who work with kids want to know, how do we talk about these events with kids? My guest tonight has trained others in nonviolent crisis intervention, which makes her the perfect guest for this show, and which also means you should take advantage of that and call in your questions now. Locally, dial 218-788-2844 or call toll-free at 1-877-307-8762. We'll be answering your questions throughout tonight's show. My guest tonight is Sabrina Matheny, a licensed clinical social worker and program manager at the Human Development Center, who specializes in the treatment of children and adults who've been exposed to trauma and secondary trauma. Thanks so much for joining us. And I'm actually really very sad that we even have to talk about this topic at all. And even more so, just, want to send out today at the beginning of the show. I've been doing it at the end of the show. On behalf of Sabrina and myself and everybody here at WDSE and HDC, that our hearts go out to Rancho Tejana in California. And you had let me know, actually, that oh my gosh, the timeliness of the show is just a little eerie and uncanny.
Exactly.
But we're talking tonight really not about necessarily what do you do when you're in that terrible situation, because we're trying to prevent things from getting to that terrible situation, and talking more on a human-to-human level. And tell us first just how you think this is applicable, just sort of to everyday people and everyday situations.
Right. So I think we've all been in situations, whether we're at the grocery store and we hear someone start to escalate and maybe yell, and we're not really sure what's going on and we don't really know what to do. We wonder if we should do something or not do something. We've all been in situations with friends or family or people that we know where, it's like the stress is built, and now, they're acting in a way that may be out of character, or they're acting in a way that doesn't seem kind of logical for them. And that's when some of these crisis intervention and prevention skills can be helpful in those situations that many of us have faced many times in our lives.
And so let's take the first one that you named, which is you're in a grocery store and you don't necessarily then know the person who is escalating or kind of causing a little bit of a ruckus or a scene,
right?
Causing a scene, because I think that a lot of people would feel like, I don't know what I'm even supposed to do. Am I supposed to continue shopping?
Right. Right. We get kind of our own anxiety about what should I do? I don't know if I do the right thing. Here in northern Minnesota particularly, we have the it's none of my business, let's just kind of ignore things. And so I think that can be a natural tendency, and yet a lot of people have regrets about not just asking even the question. And not very many people have examples of, when they said something that can be very, very simple, what's going on? Is there something happening? That those sorts of questions can, said in a genuine way, can kind of de-escalate the situation. They can slow it down. They can interrupt kind of the back and forth that can happen when people start to escalate and get upset. And sometimes even that is just enough. So you don't necessarily have to know the solution to the problem. You don't have to know what was going on, but sometimes just a basic, simple question can be enough to cause a situation to maybe end sooner than it otherwise would have.
And then what are the magic simple questions? Are there magic words that you can give us to use?
I think what's going on, is there something happening or what's happening? Is there something that could be helpful to you right now? I mean, that's a longer one, but those are very kind of short statements.
So the what's going on, I think that some people in that situation would say it like, hey, what's going on here?
Right.
Which seems a little aggressive, and certainly could to the individual.
Absolutely. And that's one of the key things about crisis intervention is that we need to pay a little bit more attention to our nonverbals. So our tone of voice, kind of want to be gentler. Some of those basic things like, we don't want to really stand kind of face-to-face square on with someone because that, tends to be a threat. And in any situation where when people start to get anxious, we're not thinking at our best. So, whenever we're under stress, we're not using all of our cognitive capacity. So asking short, simple questions, with a slightly lower tone of voice tends to be some of those strategies, those nonverbal strategies that are also helpful.
And it's interesting that you said, when we're anxious, we're not thinking our best. And it seems to me like what we would have is a group of several people who were anxious. You have the person who maybe is distressed, who isn't thinking as clearly because of the level of distress. And then you have the people around them who aren't thinking as clearly because they're anxious as well. So checking tone and making sure, taking a moment before you speak to make a conscious effort of how I say this is going to be as important as what I say.
Absolutely. And when I say anxiety, I also am referring to anger. Like anger is in the same way. We're not thinking at our best.
Yeah, good clarification. I kind of think I knew that in my head. I knew what she meant in my head, but nice that she would share that with all of us then, and so that I didn't just have to think that in my head. What about like this notion also is, I think that I have witnessed myself, like in a public setting where one person is escalating and the person kind of trying to be helpful steps forward to that person, and I don't know that I would say got in their face, but I remember when I witnessed that, I kind of took a deep breath in because I thought like, oh, that's awfully close.
Absolutely. So that space, and those are some situations that, we don't want people to put themselves in harm's way, but those are some situations where, even kind of saying, hey, maybe we should back up a little bit. Let's, over here there may be some more room, because we do respond to those things that our brains perceive as threats: tone of voice, space, body posture, facial expression from other people.
And so you just brought up a really good point that I was thinking about, is sometimes your way of being helpful may not even also be to the person who is escalating, but to the person trying to intervene, who's intervening in a way that increases the likelihood of further escalation rather than de-escalation.
Right. And sometimes it can be as simple as going to get someone else who could help the person.
That's a really great idea. What else do we need to be mindful of? So, the person is maybe shouting at one individual, and then I say like, hey, I'm wondering if you need any help here. And it's like, and either, like, of course, can't you see I need help?
Right.
Where that's turned, like the fear, I think for some people is that going to be turned on me?
Right. And there are situations where one of the big things is people like to be validated, right? So sometimes it's about, I can see you're really upset and I'm not quite sure what you're upset about. That can even be, we all want to be heard, and so sometimes just kind of getting another minute and having what that emotion is can be helpful. Sometimes when people are escalated, the natural tendency of all people is to escalate with them. And so if the person turns it on them, I think it turns it on the person who's trying to intervene. It's really helpful to try to remember to just slow down, keep yourself slow, breathe deep, so that you're having some of those pauses.
And I think so it feels to me like I might want to say in that situation of like, oh my gosh, I see that I've upset you and that wasn't my intention. I'm really sorry. And that would be how? Would that be an okay thing to do?
Yeah, that would be a great strategy. It's just, I'm trying to help or figure out what's going on, and sorry that I upset you. It accomplishes both the validating. It's really just a repeating, kind of a simple phrase.
What are the situations there where, or what are we looking for? So, I mean, I feel like if somebody is already yelling, that seems already escalated, but are there things beforehand that we should be looking for to even catch things a little sooner?
Yeah, sometimes there's, even before the yelling, there's kind of some postures or repetitive movements that people make, or, kind of more, their nonverbals are more abrupt, seem more aggressive, or, if you're watching the situation, you can kind of see like, oh, that's not going to go well. Or I think the other thing too that sometimes observers can pick up on is, oh, the person that's trying to help them isn't getting what they're actually trying to say. And those are some of the situations that can lead to some of that yelling, and you can see that mismatch even sooner.
I think if we go back to the store situation, if you had like a clerk and a customer, and then that's just sort of escalating. So one of the ways even there to do would be to say like, I'm wondering if a manager could help.
Absolutely.
Because you see like this is going nowhere or a bad where pretty quickly here.
Right. And I think from the perspective of the person who may be escalating, like they're kind of locked into talking with who they're talking to. And sometimes those ideas like, oh, this person doesn't even have the ability to help me, like we're not thinking in that way. And so those suggestions are things that, again, slow it down and say, maybe there is someone else who can help. It might interrupt the dynamic, and it might be someone who has a little bit more experience working with, like in the store situation, customers that are upset.
When would you not want to engage? Or, yeah, well, since I just asked that question, let's go with that question.
I think if there's threats, if there's any threat of violence, this is not about putting yourself in harm's way. So violence, certainly any weapons. I think you also have to pay attention to who you have with you. So if you're in the grocery store and you're shopping with your 4-year-old, your first priority may be getting your 4-year-old away from the scene that isn't really a good one for them to observe.
I think that's a really good point, because I think that there are some of us who might feel like I have the skills to intervene, and now I feel like, what is my moral obligation here? Is my moral obligation to help a bad situation from going worse, or do I have the moral responsibility, or is it okay for me to be, I don't know if I want to say selfish, some people would feel like it might be selfish to take care of my family first.
Well, I think it's the thing we hear on airplanes all the time. Put your own oxygen mask on first before you help other people. And then, you probably want to help the more vulnerable, so your child. And so I think that those are okay things to make, because if you're intervening in a situation, and maybe it's just people are yelling and you think that's all it's ever going to be, kids may be additionally scared because they may not understand that this is yelling, they may overassess the risk, and they see you putting yourself in risk. So it can be very scary for them. And so I think there's no right or wrong decision, but people have to, and you would certainly know your kid, but make decisions based on what may have the least harm for everyone. And sometimes I think that is taking care of your family.
And that's an okay decision to make too, right?
Absolutely.
That we don't have, we're not going by a moral playbook here of step 1, step 2.
And I think it's also about, even in situations that may not appear to be the moral playbook, if you've had a really stressful day and you are late for your next thing, even if you have the skill set, you're going to have to work really hard to access that skill set. It just may not be a good setup for you.
That's a wonderful point. So you might be the right person on the right day, but you could just as easily be the wrong person on the wrong day.
Right. Because we bring our energy into that interaction. And so if our energy is tense, if we're kind of anxious, if we're in a hurry, that's going to come across, and that becomes kind of fuel to the fire of the situation versus when we can really look to stay calm and centered, and we are kind of water to the fire, so to speak.
When do I call 911? Because I think that is also like, I can picture where that's a common question,
Right.
that people have is, when do I call 911? Do I just go ahead and call it right now because maybe it'll take them a while to get there? Do I move away so nobody can hear me calling 911?
Right. Well, I think certainly any threats of violence, weapons, those are the easy ones. I would say that people worry too much about calling 911. And so if there's a situation that you think is starting to get there, I think it's better to call 911 early and have the police respond and have it be like, oh, okay, this is already taken care of, than to have a situation get out of control where people are hurting themselves or hurting other people. And I also think of it as a way of, like, sometimes calling 911 is about helping people not get themselves into more trouble than they may already be in.
And I've also had the experience of from the Duluth Police Department where, it turns out to be an acute case of nothing at all, and their response is, that's the kind we like.
Absolutely.
That they're not wanting people to be hurt and therefore getting to respond, right?
Right.
I think kind of related to that, one of the things that we see in this day and age is people taking out their cell phones and videoing something, and I think that has its place. Is that going to escalate things? Because it feels to me like it could.
Yeah, I think that, again, it has its place, but that it can be one of those things that escalates situations. Sometimes audiences, just in and of themselves, keep people locked in the situation, because now it's like, if I'm going to back down or be wrong in front of this group of people, or being videoed and be wrong in that. So being taped can kind of give this audience phenomenon that makes it a lot harder for people to slow the situation down and take a break.
And the whole audience phenomenon, let's talk about that, because I don't know that that's a helpful thing either, right? Like the building audience of I think when any of us are distressed, having a large audience around us is not what is helpful for us in that moment.
Right. And so that's not to say we want to isolate ourselves into a situation, but it may be that we want to, make sure that there's space around people, that there's that kind of line between, are there people that kind of are helping with some of that safety, and now are we just have people who are curiosity seeking?
Now, how does all of this change if it's a family member, given that Thanksgiving is right around the corner, and not everybody has the Hallmark family, and there's often alcohol involved?
Right. I think in many of those situations, those we do want to kind of pull apart from other family members and kind of go to a different room, or ask them if they will step into a different room. Certainly if there are children involved, kind of move children to a different room. And those get to be very tricky situations that people get really anxious about intervening, because it is your family and you're with them all the time. But I think in hindsight, most people would say, like, I wish I wouldn't have had that many people around, or I wish I wouldn't have said that, because then so-and-so who wasn't even involved in the situation heard. So yeah, trying to separate, get some space, so it's just fewer people who are involved in the situation, really will help things calm down a little bit quicker than that building audience.
In general, would you say that when it's families, that people are more reluctant to intervene in a timely way, that could be helpful, and they wait too long?
I think by and large that's the case. And sometimes you have knowledge of a history of a situation. Certainly in families, I think we're a little more reluctant to make people upset with us. And there are lots of complicated dynamics frequently.
You know, or people just also saying like, well, that's just Uncle Joe and that's what Uncle Joe always does. You know, just saying like, this is just a repeat of last year's Thanksgiving and everything worked out fine then.
Right, some of that normalization that can happen that still can allow situations to go beyond what may be good for everyone.
Let's talk now about the second part that we said we would talk about, which is that whole notion of, with all of what's been in the news with the mass shootings, and I think that you know, I hear this a lot as well from parents is what do I tell my kids about this?
Right. I think the basic bottom advice, if you remember nothing else, is children do better with as much factual information that is developmentally appropriate. And so that certainly varies depending on how old the child is.
And so then, which leads me to my question, is how young is too young to be saying anything, I guess?
Right. I think this is really hard because with young children, you know, even preschool children, they are very observant and they may be exposed to a lot of media, even in places that you're really trying to tightly control it. And so I think if your child gets exposed to some of that, being able to reassure them or say, yep, bad things happened, there were lots of people that help, reinforce all the things you're doing to help them stay safe is a good plan, but really important to try to help and limit media exposure to young children.
And so that means turning off the TVs?
Yes. You know, I was in a conversation last week and someone just said very clearly, little brains don't understand instant replay. So they don't understand that this, you know, the shooting, that it's only one church or it's only one school. They're seeing school after school after school, and they can easily go to, it's a much bigger thing. And they don't understand how far away it is. So
I love that reminder to us about just how the child's brains work, which we're often just, you know, we as adults like so forget those kinds of things and can't even imagine that, oh my gosh, they think it's 13 shootings,
right,
not one, or they don't know that it's not the church down the street, or they don't know how far away Texas or California is. What about for older kids, teenagers?
Right. So I think with teenagers, one of the really important things to be aware of that's been changing in our society is some of their news is coming from social media. And social media is releasing information very, very quickly, and sometimes it's not accurate. So I think it's important for parents to help their children be good consumers of social media and ask questions. You know, one strategy is to ask your child, you know, have you talked about the shooting in California at school? What are your friends saying about it? So to have those questions that are based in curiosity, which lets you know what they're thinking about it, and they may just thinking, yep, we haven't really talked, I'm not really thinking about it. That's helpful. You can be done with that conversation. Or there may be information that you want to correct, or they may be having lots of thoughts that you also want to be able to address with them.
I know that we've asked you like the same set of questions for different topics, and so the Sabrina answer to this is answer only the question that the child is asking.
Right.
If they're not, if your question that you just said, if they're not responding to that, drop it. Let
Right.
your child take the lead on that then.
Absolutely, especially in that middle childhood, the elementary school, middle school kids, because sometimes they're only asking the question from their developmental perspective, and we hear it with our adult anxiety and our adult thoughts, and they just want really a black and white concrete answer.
And so with all this concept, because now we have to be wrapping up because the show is short, that's why we're wrapping up. And I've been ending the show with what is your message of hope? And I feel like we all kind of need a message of hope, Miss Sabrina, so.
I think the message of hope is that these tragic opportunities are tragic and they're happening, and it can give people a chance to connect with the loved ones that they have. I think we can use it to really look at how important community is in our lives, and parents' chances to have conversations with their children that are important.
So I love that concept of that we have to remember that we're all a part of this community, and not being afraid to intervene. One of my favorite things that Sabrina said this evening is that people tend to regret more the things they did not do, not the things that they did. Thanks so much for joining the discussion, and don't forget to visit us on the web at speakyourmindonline.org, where you can find a schedule of our topics and resource links. We'll be off the next 2 weeks, first due to Thanksgiving, of course, so I want to take this opportunity to express how grateful I am to you for tuning in, to Sabrina for being here and being a part of our Speak Your Mind family, and how grateful I am to all the courageous people out there who've shared their stories with us. You truly are our ambassadors of hope, and the week after we'll be off for the WDSE membership drive. We'll be back on Thursday, December 7th, when we'll be talking about facing adversity and learning how to embrace this is how it is right now. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps. Thanks for watching, and good night.